In this episode, we venture into the realm of the virtual tabletop as we explore the limitations of grids and distances. Welcome to the Mythras Matters Podcast, Season 1, Episode 79. It's time to ditch that pesky grid. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I'm your host, Inwils, and welcome to March. Now, if you've ever been on my YouTube channel, you will be aware that I have some evergreen content on there. Evergreen content, as the name suggests, is content that does not go out of date, so people will continue to watch and engage with it as the years roll by. Initially, it might appear as this was some kind of strategic thought that I had or plan, but no, I just created this content because it seemed to be an appropriate place to start, i.e. with the basic concepts of the Mythras rule set. But this evergreen content has been a great source of information. Every now and again, there is a sudden increase in the number of people watching this content, accompanied by questions or kind words in the comments. This alerts me to a new flow of people who have found my content and, most importantly, have started their Mythras journey. This has been happening for a number of years now, and it is good to know that people are finding what I like to refer to as the hidden gem of the role-playing systems. Having left Twitter or X some time ago, I am currently engaging more in Threads and, to a lesser extent, Blue Sky. Looking through my feed, I am bombarded by a large number of content referring to D&D, from I'm looking for a game through people celebrating finishing their first session with all their hit points intact, to a number of posts showing their setup or their perfectly crafted character that allows them to defy all opponents. Despite this, I tend to keep my content generic, but every now and again I post something that will let me start to share the wonders of Mythras. I don't do this to try and convert people, I do it to show what else is out there. You all know why and how I discovered Mythras, and I'm not going to regale you all again with that tale, but I had to do quite a search until I found it. I hope that sharing concepts and ideas about the Mythras rule set, that I might be able to help those players and GMs who might be looking for something different. Whether they are tired of their own game rules or are just looking for a new set of rules, sharing might show them something new and something that they might be tempted to try. And if they try and enjoy, then they might start their journey into the RPG that I love so much. Once I had decided that Mythras would be my new RPG, I needed to decide where I was going to host the games. Adventuring around a real-life table was never an option, with two of our players living in the United States and the rest of us across the pond in the UK. The only way forward was to use a virtual tabletop, And so I started to explore the range that was on offer, eventually deciding on Roll20. I was therefore interested when I received a request to come onto the podcast to talk about the use of virtual tabletops. I have to admit, the chat turned out to be incredibly inspiring. So without further ado, here it is.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vasilis. You find me in many different channels in the Mythras Discord, expressing strong opinions about pretty much anything having to do with tabletop RPGs, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Brilliant. And you're quite experienced in playing tabletop RPGs, yeah? Have you been doing it for quite a while?
Yes. This winter of 2026 marks 13 to 14 years of GMing experience, with the obvious caveat that I did start at age 19. So it's there's a lot of immaturity in there and sort of growth over the years, starting from no real consideration about why are rules the way they are, what are we doing. It started with me and my childhood friends throwing dice at each other around a table and evolved from there.
So we're going to be talking about virtual tabletops today, which is going to be really exciting. But I thought it would be a good start to talk about theatre of the mind and why you find that difficult, etc.
Absolutely. So as a big disclaimer, this is not an attack on theater of the mind. If you and your table do theater of the mind and you all have a ton of fun with it, all the power to you. I am genuinely happy for you. Yeah. With that disclaimer, I have a pretty moderate form of aphantasia, which means I struggle to a very high degree to have images in my mind. And then even if I can force myself to have that image, it's really hard for me to describe it. So things like color, the shape of something, texture, it's really hard for me to just pop that into my head. And so theater of the mind as a GM is really not an option for me, because while I could do it, I would not be able to meaningfully explain what's going on in any sort of either helpful or evocative way for my players.
And when I read the notes, reading about it, I suddenly thought there might be instances when I'm using theatre of the mind, but, one of my players might not actually be able to picture, what I'm actually describing at all, so it was really interesting to hear that. So, do virtual tabletops help this? Is this where your passion lies, to use virtual tabletops?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the biggest things, actually, no, I won't say one. The biggest thing for me for visual representation in virtual tabletops is that myself and all the players, we are looking at the same thing. If there is a goblin facing the player party, that goblin is represented in some way. It could be a 2D token on a cute little circle in Roll20, or it could be a complicated 3D Unity asset bundle that I've imported in Tabletop Simulator, but at least we are all looking at the same thing. So if there's questions and someone asks me, that goblin token has a spear, does this goblin actually have a spear? Then I can say yes, and it answers the same question for everyone. We're on the same page.
Yeah. And one of the aspects, and I think I spoke about it with somebody in a previous episode, it's very much a top-down view, isn't it, with virtual tabletops?
They generally are. The VTT that I use is Tabletop Simulator, which is actually a 3D engine. So it doesn't have to be top down. You can zoom all the way in such that a single token takes up your whole screen. And in the case of a 3D figurine, that 3D figurine would take up your whole screen. But it is still very top down in the sense that it's just simulating a tabletop, which in real life is still very much a top down view. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And the tabletop brings more, though, doesn't it? More than just the visual aspect of it.
Yes, absolutely. So for me, this is getting a little bit more into the specifics, but because like I said, I can't visualize things in my head. If we're doing something that appears all the time in Mythras, such as a battlefield in any way, shape, or form, that battlefield is going to have features that should be significant. And a VTT of any kind allows me to represent it exactly how I intend for it to impact the players. If there's a trench between the players and the goblins, I can put that trench exactly where I want it to be. And I can tell people, hey, if you're going to charge the goblins, you're going to have to roll athletics so you don't end up in that trench.
Yeah. So, and that goes back to this idea that everybody is then seeing the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the trench, and I talk a lot about theater of the mind with people who say it doesn't matter exactly where that trench is. Is it 10 meters away from us between us and the goblins, or is it 20 meters away from us? I understand that might not matter, but at least if we're using a virtual tabletop, we all know without me explicitly saying it that there's a trench there somewhere, and that for me solves a lot of problems right off the bat.
So this must bring tactics or, tactical positioning and movement right to the forefront.
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that I'm sure I have a well-deserved reputation for being a little passionate about. But yes, VTTs enable tactics to varying degrees. In my case, to a very high degree, and in other tables, probably a lesser degree. But the fact of the matter is, theater of the mind puts a pretty low ceiling on how in-depth the tactics can get, because the cognitive load becomes just way too high for the GM and the players alike.
Yeah, I must say, I use Roll20, as you know, and it always makes me smile, because whenever I say to my players, okay, I'm just going to put you on this map, they almost always know something is going to happen that will need the tactics. Does that make sense? It's almost like
that doesn't make sense. That makes perfect sense. I know exactly what you mean. It's so fundamental to not just TTRPGs, but any gaming experience. When the screen changes, your brain says, "Uh-oh, something started."
Exactly. And I think I sometimes struggle with that, because I don't want to always give it away that there's going to be a combat, if that makes sense. So it's sort of like suddenly changing maps to a map. Sometimes I just feel that it gives too much away.
Yes.
Rather than staying in theater of the mind. So I absolutely feel that. For me, a more recent trend, I would say the last 2 to 3 years, is my entire session in Tabletop Simulator actually takes place on one massive map. And then if there are things that are hidden, they are hidden on the map with large blocking zones that block all vision. So you still know something's going on, but it gives a little less away, since at least the map itself doesn't change. Things are revealed instead. And I find that to be less of a meta giveaway than simply saying, okay, we're going to switch to a different map now. And I'm running an M-Space campaign at the moment, and I try to put a lot of visuals on the tabletop. So like a picture of the starport or something like that. So there's always something there to sort of like get people to imagine what it. And I suppose that goes back to what you were saying, that I know we're all imagining the same thing, because it's in front of us. So one of the things I have a real issue about is movement and grids and range and things like that. So how do you deal with that in your
Sure. So here we go. So on the topic of grids, I know I've mentioned that you can find me in the Mythras Discord. Please just at me if you have opinions about this. Always happy to discuss. Here's my hot take, my strongly held opinion. If you like I said, if you want to do theater of the mind and it works for your group, please keep doing it. I will never tell anyone to not do theater of the mind. But this is my strong opinion. If you're going to start doing a virtual tabletop and you're going to play Mythras specifically, we're talking about Mythras here.
Yeah.
Mythras doesn't strictly use grids, so don't introduce them. You don't need to use a grid. When I say that, people get scared because they say, oh no, what if someone wants to move 1.5 meters? Let them do that. It's okay. The movement is as granular as you need it to be. You're actually liberated by moving away from the grid because you no longer agonize over one square over. If one of your players rushes a bandit and gets really up close and personal because they're a grappler, for example, take their token and put them on top of the bandit token. Those two characters are on top of each other. They are grappling. It is an up-close, vicious brawl. But if your Landsknecht has a 15-foot pike, put them 15 feet away. It's okay. It's going to be okay. I promise. You'll see. You'll make it work.
So I've got questions now.
Please.
So how big's the token? Because, if there's a grid, the token fills that 5 foot or that 1.5 meters or something. And I often think about it in the sense that, that person is moving around, they've got movement. So how much do they take up if we take the grid away?
Right. So that's an excellent question. There's two aspects to my answer. So aspect number one is a more modern take on the entity of the token in any space is that, like you said, it's not my physical volume. It's the space I meaningfully occupy through a combination of my bulk and my movement and my reach, perhaps. So if you take away a grid, to answer your question without speaking for the next 3 hours, the quick version is shrink your tokens. Shrink your tokens, make the map with quotes around it really, really big, and then talk more about how to your players, talk more about how 2 tokens don't need to be touching for them to be interacting.
Right.
That's the big obstacle, in my opinion, is that when you have a grid, the universal language of grids is that if 2 tokens are next to each other, they're engaged in melee combat.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because one of the other, I got several groups from the Discord that I've just been GMing one-off games with, and one of them has like a whip, a very long whip,
classic long-range melee weapon.
And I find it really should those tokens be touching for him to engage with his whip, or is it a case of the whip is X amount of meters long, so it can go from that distance? Does that make sense, or do they need to be touching?
Makes absolute perfect sense. I have 2 responses. Response number 1, very briefly going to talk about previous experiences with D20 games, in this case Pathfinder. I had a player wielding a whip which had a range of 2 squares. So that character's token could be there could be an empty square between that character and their target, and they would be whipping the target. And this introduced so many problems because there would be usually an ally between the two. And now it's weird because are they whipping over the shoulder of their... How does that work? Like, that's really weird. And then to really answer the question, I'm going to shout out another one of my players in my Mythras game who's in the Mythras Discord, Salty. Salty, if you're listening to this, I love your character. He wields a very long pike. So very, very long, classic Macedonian phalanx type pike, like 18, 20 feet, almost a 6 to 7 meter pike, real monster. And it's the same thing where if you're using a grid, that question that you just asked me, you must answer it. How many squares? Is it 3? Is it 4? How do we address this? If you get rid of the grid, you find that there's just fewer questions to answer. It's not as big of a deal because you're not playing to the grid, is my simple response. So
where do you measure? I hope you don't mind this because I've just got so many questions in my head now.
Happy to answer all of them. Please go ahead. Ask me.
So where do you measure your distances from?
Right. So I don't want to turn into a tabletop simulator shill. I'm not sponsored or I have no ties to them. So please use whatever VTT you want. I'll just answer because tabletop simulator is my VTT. There's a measure tool in there. And if you use freeform measurement, you basically get a ruler that tells you the distance between two entities. And it can actually convert to either centimeters or inches if you want. I use centimeters because it gives me higher granularity with a centimeter being, smaller than an inch. So it's that. And we use a rough conversion of a centimeter on the tabletop is a quote unquote meter in game.
So Roll20 has that. But do you, I'm sort of like imagining, this is almost like the disadvantage of a podcast, because I don't know what I'm describing, you're seeing as well.
Right.
But if I have a token, we always measure from the middle of the token.
The center of, universal rule.
So if this person has got, how long did you say their pike was?
Let's say 6 meters. Let's just say 6 meters. Yeah, real huge monster of a pike. Yeah.
Is that then measured from the center of the token going out or from the edge of the token going out?
Excellent question. It would matter a lot. However, I did say make your tokens very small.
Yes.
If you make your tokens very small, you'll find that that also usually doesn't matter too much. I think I don't know off the top of my head, but I think on my tabletop simulator setup, I think the tokens are around a third of a meter in radius. So it's really going from the center out. We're talking about the difference between a 6 meter and a 5.7 meter distance. Not a big deal.
I have a vision now of what you're saying because that token is no longer filling a square. It's a lot smaller than that. So really and truly, when I put the ruler to start on the token, it might even cover up the whole token. As I move it along.
And that's okay. And I think I know people rightfully give me a lot of flack for being the one with the rather high-powered, high-intensity games. In my game, there are giants that are 30 meters tall. If I represented that giant accurately on a grid, the game would fall apart. The entire map would be taken up by the giant's token, because if you're 30 meters tall, then your token base, my goodness, it's going to be 30 squares.
Because otherwise you're falling over.
And but if you don't have a grid, you find that I can actually make the giant's token truly mind-bogglingly huge but it actually doesn't really present any issues because the players will look at this token that takes up half the screen and they will think, wow, that is a very large giant. But they don't all of a sudden have all these questions about, is this square okay? Or am I safe in this square? It's more just, I got to run away from this giant before they turn me into paste.
So how do you, and I think I know the answer to this, but
Sure.
I'm going to ask it again. How do you deal with things like facing, you know,
Yes.
and because in my campaign, you know, that token sits in the middle square.
Yeah.
It's got its squares around it. It could hit anything, you know, in front of it, anything side or behind. How does it work when you remove that grid?
Yes, excellent question. So multiple components to this. So first of all, facing is a really interesting concept in Mythras itself, in the core rules, where it both does and doesn't exist. We don't have in Mythras the concept of a backstab, the classic D&D rogue move, and yet there is something in the rules, I believe, about defending yourself from behind. So it clearly does matter somewhat. So how do we represent that? Now, in Tabletop Simulator, a token is not a 2D circle. It's actually it's a figurine with a circular base, and then the image of the character projects upward as if it's a piece of cardboard on a 2D image. Yeah. So I can actually give that image a front and a back, and I've recently started experimenting with the front of the image having the depiction of the character, and then the back being blank, which gives a very clear front-back delineation. And that has actually done a lot of wonders, as now I can just rotate the token to face the direction that the character is facing.
I see. And I think that's when, being 2D, this is when the issue starts to happen.
Yes.
Because although you can see a person on the token, there is no facing on that token at all. You know, so because I think it's I think if you're defending from attack behind, it's sort of like formidable or
it is formidable, which is a huge penalty. So if it comes up, it's a big deal. So. But then we get into this thing where, well, if it's hard to represent it on the VTT, now we kind of run into this weird issue where I want to implement the rule, but because I can't meaningfully represent it on the tabletop, that rule almost gets neglected.
Yeah. I was just thinking as you were talking, I need to put a dot on my tokens that actually says, this is facing. This is the way you're facing. And opposite to that would be, you know, your back. Yes. Because it's not, you're right, it's not clear in that 2D world.
Right. And then we get into further issues going back to the grid, where if you do that, and then I've only ever seen square grids and hex grids. But in either case, you fall into the question of, well, what's behind? If we're using a square grid, are diagonals behind or not behind? And if we're using a hex grid, are the front 3 hexes in front of me and the rear 3 hexes behind me? Or are the 2 side hexes the side and only the back hex is my rear? Like it once again, my strongly held opinion is that when you introduce a grid to save you some effort, you just end up spending that time and effort addressing questions that come up exclusively as a result of the grid. Yeah,
and it also brings in possibilities that may be negative, in the sense that as a GM, I could be thinking I'm going up behind a character's player's token,
yeah,
and suddenly make it appear, and the player says, "No, but I'm actually facing that way."
Yeah, what do you mean? I would be looking that way. I don't want the goblin sneaking up on me.
Yeah. So what about, how do you deal with shields?
Yes.
Because I always sort of like think, they can only really shield attacks from one direction. I have a real thing about, launching it across or turning. And if you do turn to use it, your back's going to be exposed elsewhere. so how do you deal with shields?
Yeah. So in my belief is that, contrary to popular movies featuring Brad Pitt, you cannot effectively block behind you with any shield of significant size. But Mythras, one of the things that makes Mythras such an awesome game is that a shield is not just an active blocking tool. Of course, it's also a passive blocking tool. In fact, one of the greatest strengths is that you can protect yourself with a shield at no cost of time or effort. You just do it for free, so to speak. And that's really interesting. So for blocking behind, I generally am pretty strict and say you cannot meaningfully use a shield to protect behind you. If you want to use a shield to protect an enemy behind you, you must find a way to make that enemy no longer behind you. Turn around and face them.
Yeah. And I think that it's really interesting, because the more we talk, the more I actually see faults with the grid, if that makes sense. And
I'm an evangelist for a reason. That's all I'll say.
And what I'm trying to think about now is, what about all the situations that I have another question, because what the grid allows us to do is movement.
Yep.
So with the grid, I'm allowed to move through friendly tokens.
Yep.
But I'm not allowed to move through enemy tokens.
Absolutely.
So does that still... What I'm worried about is the players sort of like thinking, oh no, there will be a little gap there that I can just saunter through if I turn myself sideways.
Right. No, absolutely.
How do you deal with that?
Yes. So I have my ongoing Mythras campaign. I've got a ton of players. Some of our sessions can have 10. I've had multiple 10-player sessions. So I love my players. We work really well together. And one of the great things about ditching the grid is that you find yourself, once again, actually counterintuitively liberated by the removal of the grid. Because here's the thing. On a grid, you've got 3 player tokens next to each other. Those 3 player tokens side by side, that could be anywhere from we're spaced out in skirmish formation to we are locked together in a Macedonian phalanx. And so if you could move through tokens, well, not every 3-square formation is created equal. And you find that a skirmish formation that a horse could easily pass through, assuming we're on the same side, is not the same as a phalanx. Whereas if you remove the grid, if my players are in phalanx formation, you better believe their tokens are pretty much on top of each other. And it's abundantly clear to everyone that not even allies can get through because the shields are locked and they are shoulder to shoulder. Whereas if there is no grid, then if the tokens are not right on top of each other, players find themselves free to say, Jim and Bob, how close are you guys? Oh, we're near, but we're not shield locked. Great, I'm going to run through. I'm going to pass through the gap and charge the enemy with my axe in hand.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I love fantasy role-playing games, but I really do not have a lot of knowledge about warfare. if
Sure.
that makes sense. And
Sure.
So I think what the games I play, I've got like 4 or 5 characters that are separate. We're not having the close to-ness. They won't suddenly interlock shields or anything like that, which I'm very grateful for, because I don't know what I would do if they did.
Right.
But I was just thinking about, I want to come back to the wonderful player with the big pike.
Yeah,
because
happy to talk about him. I'm sure he's gonna love the airtime he's getting. Please go ahead.
How a pike I can understand. My primitive knowledge of pikes is that basically they are a thrusting weapon.
Yeah, absolutely. Big pointy stick.
Yeah, something like a whip is not.
Correct.
It's taking up a huge amount of space in my head as it gets whirled round. So how do you deal with that? Do you start to have to say your token can't go that close because it's going to get hit by the whip? Or if it's coming to the front, the pike's there. How do you deal with that?
So awesome question. So I know the first thing that new Mythras players run into is how does movement work in combat, and then the second thing they run into is melee weapon reach ranges. And once again, if you get rid of the grid, you find yourself able to say that if 2 players are fighting at the longer reach, shout out to Matt E, I'm using the right term, at the longer reach, and the longer reach in this case is a character's long spear, then put those 2 tokens 2 or 3 meters apart. Go ahead. But then if one of them's using a whip, then you can do the same thing. And then you can say, well, if the person that is being attacked with the whip manages to close range, then move their token closer and use that to represent that the whip wielder has been closed in on, and now they can't effectively use their whip. And then to answer your question, to show, if you want to show the threatened zone, as if you could say, of a whip, in Tabletop Simulator, I can just put circles down. I can say this area, if you want to rush this person, you will face their whip, so to speak, if you cross this circle. If it really matters that much, I can just draw a circle of 3 meter radius, and there we go.
And that's, and I can see that, and I think that really gives a clear indication of the amount of space that this person is taking up with their whip. Well, you mentioned weapon reach, which of course was going to be one of my questions. And
of course,
I have to say the table in the rule book that I've got open on page 94 really annoys me like anything, because touch is quite clear. It then says short, less than half a meter. Okay, fine. Medium, longer than half a meter. Okay. And then it says long, and it gives no measurements.
Yeah.
And then it says very long and gives no measurement. I mean, it's just sort of like, it seems to me that we have reach up to half a meter.
Yep.
And then what happens at long or very long reach?
Absolutely,
Do you just know the weapons?
No, that's an excellent question. So the honest answer is yes, I do know the weapons, but it doesn't matter that I do, because when you get rid of the grid, you as the GM are actually empowered to make the distance between combatants vis-a-vis weapon reach. You get to decide how important it is or it isn't. As an example, if the players are fighting a bunch of bloodthirsty orcs that are charging in I don't know, hatchets and one-handed hacking weapons in hand, but the players are all equipped with long spears, hoping to keep the braying orcs at bay. Well, now you have a really cool thing where you can Google how long is a long spear? Oh, it's 2.5 meters. And you say, okay, so as those orcs all charge in, completely disregarding their own safety, they're going to start getting poked by your readied spears at about 2 to 3 meters away. And you can show that on the tabletop. And it now is aiding the players. That specificity is a game aid. But then if the orcs, take the hits and then close in to start carving up the players, you can then grab the orc tokens and put them pretty close, a meter away or so. And it's helping the players. It's answering questions that didn't need to be asked in the first place. And I think that is the true power of going gridless. But, and I'll make this one quick, let's say the players have the same weapons. They have axes and hacking weapons, and the orcs have the same one. So all that's going to happen is a real messy set of cleaving each other. Then it doesn't actually matter how far away the tokens are because you're all at the same reach.
And that's very clear, and I can see it working so well. Because with the grid system, it's very difficult to talk about weapon reach.
Yes.
Because you almost have to, the two tokens come together.
They have to touch for players to understand intuitively that melee combat is happening.
Yeah. But once they've touched, there's actually a whole load of bands of reach
absolutely
in between that. So, and that is something that has always been a difficulty when those tokens are around. So what about touch? And I'm thinking about spells here.
Okay.
Certain spells need touch.
Yeah. Healing, the classic heal. Yeah, absolutely. And then any sort of I don't know, like theism spells that affect weapons and all that stuff. And mysticism is important because mysticism, if you're that classic mystic monk type, your magic doesn't have any range, but you're going in unarmed, so you're all about touch reach. So absolutely. So I will say that for anything. Actually, no, side note. I love unarmed combat. I love touch reach stuff. I think Mythras is, bar none, the best TTRPG on the planet for fleshing out for some really just brutal grappling stuff, strikes, grapples, joint locks. There's so much room to innovate and expand there. So I love touch reach. So with that out of the way, I generally will say that it depends on what other reaches are at play. If grappling and punching are going on in a session where there's also a 6-meter Macedonian pike being used, then token placement probably matters. And you're going to want to put an enemy getting attacked by a pike 6 meters away, whereas you're going to want to represent the vicious tooth and nail grappling as putting the tokens almost on top of each other, right up next to each other. But if it's a sword fight on one end and then a vicious grappling on the other, and the reaches aren't that meaningfully different, then put the grapplers almost on top of each other and then put the sword fighters a meter or two apart so that the difference is clear to everyone. You can scale it. You have control over the scale. And
so if I'm thinking this right, when I've got two tokens touching, what it's actually saying is almost like a comparison of their reach. Because they could both have short reach weapons and be touching, or they could both have long reach weapons but still be touching. Because the combat between, now obviously if another token joined that, then there might have to be some changes, because
absolutely
it's basically how the reach. I'm getting it.
I see it. Yeah, the listeners won't be able to say. I see. Or maybe if it's a video, but yeah, I see it on your face. Yes, you're seeing the potential. It's awesome. My point is, I'm not telling people to ditch the grid because going gridless is, oh, I'm so cool for doing. I'm saying you and your players will feel empowered and liberated to play and experience the game that you really want to. That's what I'm saying is so awesome.
I just feel that what I'm rather, and this might sound weird, but it makes sense in my head, rather than having a set grid rule, i.e. you two tokens are together, you're in combat. It's a lot more, well, it's like what you said, it's actually empowering because touching tokens can mean a variety of different things.
Absolutely.
And non-touching tokens can mean a variety of different things,
Absolutely.
Because it could be that they're not touching and one's got a huge 6-foot pipe that is piercing the other one. Or it could be that they're both at very long range, both hitting each other with their pikes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the easiest hypothetical I can come up with is, let's say you and Matt are fighting, are duking it out at close range. It's a short sword fight. You both have short swords and you're fighting. I breathlessly rush to Matt's defense with a long spear in my hand. Well, if we're using a square grid, then your token and Matt's token are touching, and then I rush in, and now my token is also touching your token because I'm attacking you with a long spear. But now all of us have to keep track of the fact that you're fighting at ideal reach with Matt, but you're fighting at the shorter reach against me, and all of the only way that's represented is an L-shaped arrangement of tokens on a grid. Oh my goodness. It's causing so many more problems than it's solving.
It is. And I think sometimes we look at the grid to simplify things, but by simplifying it for the grid, it's when you actually get down to it, it's actually causing more issues than if you just remove it. Then that's it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting. And I think my next stage is to actually put it into play and actually see how it works. I'm definitely going to have to do some work on facing. Pacing
is important, but you'll find, I hope at least that you'll find that by getting rid of the grid, even though you'll have to keep facing in mind in some ways, you'll find that it actually becomes less of a problem, as the fact that the grids aren't there, you can more easily place an enemy goblin in such a manner that is abundantly clearly behind the player. Because if there's a token, if the player token is fighting a goblin token and they're facing each other, or not even facing each other because there's no facing because there's no grid, but if the two tokens are touching and then you put another goblin token on the opposite end of the player token such that you can draw a straight line through all three, I don't think anyone can doubt that one of the goblins must now be behind the player.
100%. And I was just thinking that when you look at a map, a tactical map, it's really interesting because the orientation of the tokens could mean a whole load of different things, depending on the battle, depending on the weapons, because, and that's almost like the grid is actually simplifying the rules so much that it's actually losing clarity and causing more issues.
Yes.
Now.
The best way for me to explain it, from my perspective, is if you have a grid, and let's say you decide that the grid is the classic 5-foot square, or its dearly beloved cousin, the 1.5 meter square, you have essentially diegetically decided that the quantum of movement in your game is 1.5 meters. Nothing can happen with a fidelity greater than 1.5 or small, greater than 1.5 meters. It doesn't get more fine-grained than that. And that's fine most of the time, but then edge cases pop up that cause mass confusion.
Yeah. Because it's true, nobody can move. They can't move less than 1.5 meters because that is the grid.
Yeah, that's the grid. But now you're playing to the grid. You've introduced a grid to help you, and now you're making sacrifices and compromises for the sake of the grid. But wasn't the grid put there to make it easier for everyone? Why are you appeasing the grid?
Exactly. And what I'm interested in now is how small can I make the steps for the ruler in Roll20, if that makes sense. I
can't speak about Foundry, and I have very limited experience with Roll20, but for all the Roll20 listeners out there, what the only advice I can give based on my very limited experience is shrink the grid, because I know there has to be a grid in Roll20. You cannot truly remove the grid to such an extent that there's micrometer movement. I'm aware of that. Make the grid as small as possible, and then that'll be as close as you can get to going gridless, and you'll find that it's actually a pretty close approximation, where if you make the grid small and then you don't show the lines, it's good enough. It's good enough. I think it's like maybe like a tenth of a meter, or maybe it's 1 meter, but whatever it is, just shift the frame of reference where the smallest unit is actually pretty small relative to whatever your game considers to be a meter or 3 feet. That's my advice for the Roll20 people.
As soon as we finished here, I am going to go. I've actually, you don't know this, but I've actually got it open at the moment. I've actually got Roll20.
Yeah, live demo. I like it. That's awesome.
Because I've just opened a map, and it's so interesting to look at how the whole setup. I don't have a grid on, but it's so many other things that is impacting. I was just noticing that the ruler, when I do the ruler, actually gives these squares underneath. I'm going to have lots of fun with this.
Roll20 and Foundry are fundamentally built on a grid, whether it is shown or not. The calculations, the code itself, it is based on a grid. There is no concept of absolute free movement. You can make the squares of the grid really, really, really small, but they are still there, and you're sort of getting into like this infinitesimal square situation. It's pretty funny, and it is true for Tabletop Simulator as well. But the tiniest unit of movement there is so tiny as to meaningfully not exist, and that's one of the things I like about it. But one thing I actually realized I hadn't said is the origin of this gridless thing was rooted in, of course, my Aphantasia. But the thing that actually pushed me into going gridless was when I started playing Mythras, when I first found the system and started playing it, because the questions that come up in Mythras melee combat specifically, in my opinion, are so anathema to grid-based that it broke the grid, and I just got so frustrated that I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm done with grids. We're going to get rid of grids, and we're going to figure out how to hack it without grids. And then instead of hacking it, I just found that everything got better. It's like, this is great. Like, I'm not worried about it anymore. I'm just, if one of my players says I want to move 2 meters, I want to scooch 2 meters to the left, they just do that. And I'm not like, well, is that one square or two? There's no squares. you can do whatever you want. And when my Dwarf Fortress players want to get a stout line of dwarven shields to present to the foe, they just move all their tokens really, really, really close together, and it just works. So it was Mythras that actually set me free in that sense.
Yeah. 100%. I was just looking at Roll20 and, looking at the tokens. I've never looked at the tokens and the grid in this way, if that makes sense. And all of a sudden, it's quite empowering. I wish Roll20 I could just take off, not remove the grid, as in not. It seems to be, like you said, it's entrenched there.
Yes.
Everything is working from it. So you can remove the actual visual representation, the visualization of the grid, but it's still there.
Yes.
When you measure, you're still measuring.
You can make the squares really, really small, but you are still measuring squares. And so for the Roll20 people out there, make the squares as small as you possibly can. Remove the visual representation of the grid. And then for token size, I know I said make them as small as you can. I don't know what that looks like in Roll20, so I'm not necessarily telling you have really tiny, hard to see tokens, because that's not fun either. But make the grid really small and then size the tokens to taste, essentially, is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can, in Roll20, you can actually make them almost like a dot.
Yes. I don't know if I'll advocate for dots on Roll20. That seems to be the other end of the other extreme end. But my point is that try to get since you can't get rid of the grid, make the grid as close to not being a grid as possible.
Yeah.
That's my advice.
Brilliant. I really like it. And it's going to be something that we're going to have either lots of comments about or people are just going to accept it. That's what I mean.
It would make me very happy if the latter happened. But if the former happened, I want everyone to know that I'm always happy to talk about it, because once again, to reiterate, I see this as it will, if you're not theater of the mind, going gridless on your VTT will improve your gaming experience. It is an unequivocal improvement. And I think the reason for that is because whether you are, like me, a numbers freak who loves granularity and crunch in the extreme, or if you're actually the opposite and you don't want to worry about the numbers, going gridless actually takes numbers away. You worry about it less because you're not like, oh, well, there's only one square here. There's no more squares. Just make it up. You were making it up already, and now you don't have squares fighting you.
Exactly. Which is empowering. That word is, you use that very correctly. It is. It's all of a sudden empowering. Just to let you know that if any comments come up on the YouTube, you're answering them. Can I just say so?
Sure. I'll have to make a YouTube account.
Yeah. But if any comes up, I'll send you a message on Discord.
Sure. I'll spread the good word there too.
Yeah, brilliant. Before we go, is there anything else that you would like to say to the listeners about grids or no grids or anything like that?
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is I'm fully aware that I come off very strong, and I do what I can to make that strongness palatable. But I want to be clear that however you do, if you use a virtual tabletop, however you do it, I am not saying you are wrong. If your grids work for you and you don't see any way that going gridless would help you, then that's okay. If it works perfectly, then who am I to say change your ways? But my point is, if you find any friction at all encountering the grid, especially if you're playing Mythras, please give it a try. Go gridless, just try it. And if you hate it, then you can go right back to the grid. That's okay. But it's so entrenched as a concept. Like the grid has to be there for so many people that they don't even think about getting rid. It's fundamental, and I'm saying it doesn't have to be. Give it a try.
Yeah.
that's my spiel.
100. Well, while you were talking and I was listening, I just they Roll20 calls it a cell.
Okay, yeah, cells of the grid, absolutely.
I've actually got one cell down to 0.01 of a meter.
Incredible. Okay, 1 centimeter. Yeah. I don't have enough Roll20 experience to scale that, but what I can say is that's actually right around the scale I have in Tabletop Simulator. My player tokens are actually so small that if you zoom out, you can't see them. You have to zoom in. But that helps me create massive tables that go back to what we said at the beginning, where you don't want to give away the encounter, you know? So now everything's on one map and I can do dramatic reveals rather than smash cutting to a new map.
The pennies has dropped about the map now, because I was measuring my map, and my map from top to bottom is only 0.2 meters.
Okay.
You know, and I was just thinking, you know, I could shrink everything down now. Yeah. Can you see? And so I would get so much more room.
Yes. And I guess that's actually a great closing point, is that not to wax poetic, but you find that by getting rid of the grid, you have literally more room on the map to put things, even if it's a 2D like Roll20, you have more room on the map to put things that matter without getting cluttered. And then you'll find that you have more room metaphorically in your head to make combats interesting and have dynamic battlefields. And if a meteor falls from the sky, no one's going to say, what's the radius of the meteor explosion in squares, please? If you just say it's a 10-meter explosion and you're good to go.
And that's it. Well, it's been absolutely fantastic talking and listening and having penny dropped moments, which has been brilliant. Thank you so much for coming along and being on the podcast. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invite. It was absolute pleasure. I feel like a lot of people are going to listen to this that I've had long text-only discussions with. I'm excited for them to hear my voice.
I'll let you know. Well, you'll be able to see how it goes.
I'll be there. We'll talk more. Everyone who's listening, we'll be talking more.
Fantastic. Remember, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not drop me an email or message and let me know what you would like to cover. I'm always looking for reviews or chats with people, so if you're interested, you can email me at inwils@gmail.com or send me a message on the various forums and discords. Now, would you believe I have already recorded April's podcast episode? So I can tell you now that I'm going to be joined by 2 combat experts who will be helping me make sense of the use of weapons and opponents when creating encounters. Another great chat that definitely left me reconsidering how I approach combat in my campaigns. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss it, and you will get a notification when April's episode drops. Now, before I finish this episode, I wanted to make a rather sad announcement. Some of you might have read my RPG fanzine called Animated Dead. Well, rather ironically, Animated Dead is no more. But like a phoenix, a new fanzine has risen from its ashes and is now available. It's called Dice and Design and is completely devoid of any use of AI. Everything in the issues is created by me, from the written tables and articles to the maps. I am not an artist, so rather than using AI to fill the issues, I have bought artwork that is not created by AI, and I will be giving credits to the artists as requested via their licenses. The good news is that the fanzine still remains completely free, and you will be able to receive future copies by subscribing to the Inwils newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And that's it, another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Don't forget you can check out all my content by following my YouTube channel and the campaign areas on World Anvil. And if you would like to support my creator career, then do check out my adventures and encounters as digital downloads in my Ko-fi shop. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat to you all again in April when we will be diving into combat once more. Until then, I hope all your opposed rolls succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.